Hollow Knight Silksong is probably the best game I played this year, or at least one of the best games I played this year. But there's definitely some things that I don't like about the game. Most of my criticisms seem to align with the community consensus, and I can basically sum it up to Silksong has a smaller, frustrating gameplay loop embedded into the wider gameplay. Lurking behind the great combat, platforming, and exploration lies a terrible, terrible evil. Unsurprisingly, I'm talking about Silksong's runbacks. I think most people would agree that Silksong is a competent successor as it undeniably builds upon and improves a lot of the features that Hollow Knight brought to the table, while crucially maintaining the overall identity of the series. However, Silksong also preserves and enhances some artifacts from Hollow Knight that I definitely would have rather been left in the past. There are some pretty bad runbacks in Hollow Knight, but in Silksong, I think they are worse and more frequent. Remember paying for a few stag stations in Hollow Knight? Team Cherry thought, wow, Hollow Knight is such a great game. Everyone loves it. We should totally make the player pay for benches and fast travel, on top of making it more expensive in a game where rosaries are less frequent than Geo, especially in the early game because we just love punishing all the players who play this game. Remember the rooms with waves of enemies in Hollow Knight? Imagine if they were everywhere. Wouldn't that be great? The best part is, all of these systems feed into each other, and it makes for an especially hostile and unwelcoming introduction to Hollow Knight Silksong. And in Act 1, this is terrible because you basically have no beast shards. If you donated to this builder pilgrim guy, you are in shell shard debt until the rosaries are abundant enough in Act 2 where you can actually afford to buy shell shards. Because we know that these environmental deposits with shell shards give you like 7. It's actually such a bad scam. Oh, but in Act 1, where are all of your fucking rosaries? They're all gone because you had to pay for benches and beltway stations. Basically, the gameplay loop consists of getting to a wave room, die, do a terrible run back either because the bench is too pricey or the bench is actually behind the wave room. And if Hornet ran out of shell shards, you can't particularly make it easier for yourself with tools. For me, this felt like a reasonably frequent occurrence, and of course you can swap the wave room with like bosses or whatever, and it still applies, but at least bosses are more fun to fight instead of, for whatever reason, all the enemies are doing like 2 contact damage and there's like 5 of them in the room. And the cherry on top is that the rewards for making it through these very, very, very evil trials and tribulations is like 20 rosaries on a string. And it's like, what am I going to do with this? Make a down payment on a bench? Or there's just actually nothing. Or maybe, just maybe, I'm blessed with the opportunity from Team Cherry and given an opportunity to pay for a bench. Like, yeah, these are awesome rewards, Team Cherry. This is fucking fantastic. And sometimes, it's a beast shard, which is very useful in Act 1. But in Act 2, oh my god, it is the least useful reward you could ever get because you can just kill like the violin wielding bow people near like the Clockwork Twins or whatever, and you can just farm and you can make so many rosaries and buy beast shards. In Act 2, it's the most evil reward ever. And it's not like Silksong has no rewards. They're just distributed horrifically. I love the platforming in Silksong, and exploring in this game is very, very fun. Nothing brings me more joy than hearing the secret unlock sound. But would it have been so terrible if we just put more mass shards behind a few bosses? Or just, I don't know, come up with a new reward or something. Just any reward. Give me anything for making it through some of these like terrible trials and tribulations. It would make it so much less demoralizing to just ram your head into a brick wall if I knew a reward was going to come behind it. At least they gave me a mass shard for enduring the great evil that is the Beastfly. But for anything in the overworld, from a wave room to a boss, Team Cherry is like, man, I don't know about that. Oh, you beat the Morwing? The best I can do is a Beast Shard. Maybe a Frayed Rosary String? I don't know, man. The best I can do, final offer. And this, really reluctant. They're like so reluctant to reward the players, and it's just very demoralizing. One more rant before I start like glazing the shit out of the game. I'm gonna keep it brief because I actually have no Act 3 footage, but why did like 2 out of 4 of the final bosses suck? Like Scarsinger Carmelita is like a really, really fun fight. And I think like this like Ant Queen vibe, and it's like, I'm not a big fan of like the wave in front of the boss, but man, like she's like her like actual boss fight is so good, and it's just so complex and it's so deep, and it has like a bunch of very different moves. It's just such an awesome fight. But the Crust King Khan and Nihilith barely count as bosses. They have less moves than overworld enemies. Seth literally hard clears both of them. The Crust King was hyped up like crazy too. That's the worst part. Chakra was like talking about like, oh, there's evidence here that this city in like whatever could have been like they used to rival the Citadel. And he pulls up in his dream state prime, and his goons have more attacks than him. Why does he only have like this one pillar attack? It's so disappointing. It feels like so anticlimactic. And at least for Nihilith, they don't have like 3 wave rooms before the boss. So like in all fairness, I think that Nihilith is a little bit better than the Crest King, but it's also such a weird step down from the mostly great bosses that populated Act 1 and Act 2. Act three's peaks, however, are very, very high. The moments that this game creates in Act 3 are just so engaging and immersive. The finishing sequence was so brilliant. And the final boss fight was actually probably one of my favorite fights in the whole game. I'm going to leave Act 3 at that. And now I'm just going to talk about like platforming, combat, and like all the other stuff that like kind of just makes the game feel really complete and like just such a joy to play. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about like some of the bosses first. Only a few. I think the first Sinner is probably my favorite boss in the entire game outside of the final boss. The pace that this boss puts on is just so different and far removed from all the other bosses in the game. And it makes for such an action-packed, like really, and it's just a super fun, like pacey fight. And this boss, it really makes you feel like you're like you're hunting, you're like a hunter, but not in like a really boring, easy way where it's like because like man, this boss has some bite too, and it's just such a great push and pull. And learning this fight is such a joy, and because it's not like super complex with a bunch of different mix-ups or whatever, it just feels like such a fair, fun, and fast fight. And not to mention, man, there's no run back to it either. So like this fight's just pretty awesome. I think the last judge is probably like the perfect gatekeeper boss. Because like the first time you fight it, it's pretty overwhelming, especially during the first encounter. But with the tools that like you have at the point that you encounter it, it feels like a pretty fair fight. And it gives the player like a lot of time to consider what their next move should be in both phases. Like, because especially with like the like fire whip attack where he creates the circles of flames, you have a lot of time to like try and like figure out how you're going to react to the next move, and it gives you a lot of time to think. So I don't really think the fight itself is that hard, but if you can beat it, it almost definitely sets you up for success in Act 2. The fourth chorus is a really great early game boss. It's probably the first boss that really tests your ability to weave movement into your gameplay and like sneak attacks in, and it just feels like a really like the probably like one of the first really like rewarding and fun fights to learn. Like outside of I think like Lace comes before it, but like outside of that, like this is probably like my favorite like first early game boss. My favorite area in the game is probably Cogwork Core. I'm not sure if this is like a really popular opinion, but I think that this area was pretty fun. When I look at the rest of the areas in the game, I think that the platforming was pretty weak. I don't think it was like that challenging, and I think I kind of suck at platforming as well. But overall, I think like the platforming in Silksong was pretty weak. So Cogwork Core felt like a really refreshing area, especially when I was generally disappointed by the platforming offered in like the other areas in the game. I think hopefully in future DLC we'll get like some really hard platforming segments, and I think that'll be really fun. I really, really, really like the fleas. I'm so happy that Krat was just a D1 freak and not a cannibal. When I freed this guy, I totally thought he was going to eat everyone, but he didn't, and that made my day. And the Flea Festival was so good. I love minigames. I'm a sucker for them. And it was probably the best way to get a nail oil. It was way better than the Courier's Rash here, at least. It's just such a fun area and like such a fun like little challenge, especially with like the tone of Act 3 and everything. Overall, I really like the fleas in Fleetopia. I think Shakura was probably my favorite questline and Sherma was my favorite character, which I imagine is probably like the most basic and tame opinion like any human could have. Having Hornet as the protagonist is just such a welcome change. I think the difference between having characters that actually converse with each other versus, like a one character talking to nothing is such a big difference, and it makes it so much easier for me to engage and understand these characters a little bit more and feel a little bit more connected to them, especially as I feel connected to the protagonists themselves, because Hornet's past is pretty interesting, and I think this game definitely does a lot of like things to answer some mysteries about Hornet. But overall, though, I don't really have a lot to say about the narrative because like I'm not a big lore guy, so I have a really hard time evaluating like these kind of stories where you have to go read a bunch of item descriptions and then do a little bit of guesswork. But like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe Mossbag can tell me how to feel about this game's narrative later. Silksong's polish is like crazy, for the most part. There were some parts that felt kind of bad. My pet theory behind this is that since they only have a small pool of playtesters, the playtesters must be too good. Because my god, some of these sections looking back are very simple and easy, but at the time, when you don't really know what to do in the game, it's horrific. It's so bad. But other than that, the amount of polish is crazy. And like, the number of cutscenes is astounding. It's no wonder this game took 7 years to finish or whatever. There are so many cutscenes. And the animation and art are all on point. And the music is like totally back. Like it never left at all. Like the music is so good once again. Like it's just Team Cherry did such a great job. Combat in Silksong is weird though. It really should not be much harder than Hollow Knight. And that's because it's probably not. But for me, what made it so oddly difficult early on especially is two things. Number one, tools are basically unavailable in early game because you're constantly poor. And two, the more interesting point is because I think Silk management is really weird in this game. Silk is basically the same as Soul in Hollow Knight, but it feels so much worse to use a Silk skill in Silksong. And that's because healing in this game is so damn expensive. And even though it probably evens out because it heals you for 3 masks, it's just such a mental block because you're not able to heal in like the same ways that you are in Hollow Knight. So the way you have to manage your Silk is just fundamentally different, and you like inherently have to take on more risk because you can't just heal 1 mask here and there. But Silk songs like Silk skills like in Hollow Knight do a lot of damage, and in Silksong it's 100% easier to get Silk because of the tools that you can equip and like the charms and stuff in Silk Hearts. So the game really should not be much harder. But my god, it feels really bad to heal and lose 80% of the Silk bar. I think if the healing in the game worked differently, like in Hollow Knight, I would probably be spamming Silk skills like all the time and doing a shit ton of damage. If I was a less conservative player and much more willing to take risks, this game would almost definitely be much, much easier. What Silksong excels at is build diversity. Being able to have up to 7 different movesets and a bunch of different tools you can play around makes the game feel so varied. And I think it's so awesome to see, especially coming from Hollow Knight, where most of the time your gameplay is the same, but you can see somebody who's like really good with the Reaper or Beast Crest, and it just looks so cool. Basically, I really like this game, but some of its features are not the most enjoyable. Overall, it's like a very competent sequel, and it definitely met my expectations, and I think in its current state, it's very close to being better than Hollow Knight for me. And with future DLCs, I'm very confident that it will get there and reach even greater heights.